Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A village girl glowed with happiness at the thought of her upcoming wedding. However, at home, this news was not welcomed at all, and a heavy cloud of scandal loomed over the entire village. She left to be in the arms of her fiancé and think about the future. Not far away, in the city, a doctor from the village was walking along the lake. There, she encountered two foreigners of Eastern appearance and overheard their conversation. Struggling to recall the language she had spoken in her distant childhood, the woman was horrified to realize that they were talking about that very bride from the village, and the things they were discussing were far from good. These two young souls were no different from any other couple in love. Only the girl's behavior caused some confusion. She kept glancing around nervously, as if fearing the sudden appearance of someone who could ruin everything. At that moment, she should have trusted her intuition, for ahead of her awaited not only the euphoria of love, but also a series of scandals. Seeing his beloved's anxiety, the young man gently asked, "Louisa, calm down. Believe me, no one cares about us." The girl forced a strained smile. "David, I understand that, but I can't help it. For several days now, I've had the feeling that someone is watching me." The young man froze for a moment. Then, taking her hand, he said softly, "It's just your imagination. In this huge city, we are nothing more than two tiny grains of sand." Taking both of her hands in his, he continued, "And right now, the most important thing for us is not to lose each other." The girl let out a nervous chuckle. "Yes, that's true. Honestly, so much has happened in the past 2 weeks that everything feels surreal to me." David squeezed her palms. "You're just very impressionable. But you've always been that way, that's what I love about you." Leaning in closer, he whispered, "Don't be afraid. Everything will be fine." The girl shook her blonde curls, and with that movement, the romantic aura surrounding them seemed to spill into the air. Unexpectedly, Louisa sarcastically remarked, "David, it's easy for you to talk about the future. You're staying here, but I have to face my parents. I can't even imagine how my father will react to this news. He's a strict man." Her last words were too loud, drawing the attention of passengers waiting for their departure. Several pairs of eyes turned in their direction. David gave her a pleading look. "Louisa, lower your voice, people are staring at us." The girl gave him an apologetic smile. "Sorry, I'm just overwhelmed with emotions." The young man suggested optimistically, "Let me come with you. I can still run to the ticket counter." A nearby elderly woman grumbled, "If you're hoping to catch the bus to Costa Pedregosa, I hate to break it to you, but you're too late. All tickets for today and tomorrow are sold out. It seems like the whole city is heading there at once. Suddenly, everyone urgently needs to go to Costa Pedregosa." David asked the woman sympathetically, "So you didn't get lucky either?" The woman eyed him from head to toe. "And what business is it of yours? Just stand there and mind your own affairs instead of bothering people with silly questions." The young couple exchanged glances, then quietly giggled. The woman cast them a distrustful look and muttered, "People like you wander around, and then suddenly things go missing from pockets." Her remark sparked another fit of laughter among the couple. Other passengers also chuckled, while the grumpy lady quickly distanced herself from them. Almost at that very moment, a bus emerged from around the corner of the station building and pulled up smartly to platform number 5. The waiting passengers rushed toward the front door, but the most aggressive among them was that very same lady. She used her elbows effectively and shouted, "Let me through. I need to go urgently." The passengers who had tickets were not happy with such behavior. They formed a united chorus of protest. "Lady, everyone needs to get on. The bus isn't made of rubber." Already at the door, the woman exclaimed, "What kind of people are you? I need to get to a funeral." The voices fell silent all at once, and everyone shamefully averted their eyes. Louisa whispered to David, "I bet she's just pretending and made up the funeral to get people to feel sorry for her." The young man smirked. I wouldn't joke about that. Though, this woman clearly knows how to get her way and would do anything to achieve her goal. If she really were going to a funeral, she wouldn't be dressed so cheerfully. She doesn't look like she's in mourning. Louisa rested her cheek against his shoulder. You're so observant. The young man replied with a mysterious smile. I'm a future artist, I'm supposed to be observant. The girl playfully flicked his nose. That's just in your plans for now. At the moment, you're still a student and will soon receive your diploma as a lighting director. David swiftly caught her hand mid-air before she could repeat the gesture. His voice grew slightly less cheerful. Louisa, don't do that again. I'm a man. A shadow of discontent crossed the girl's face. What did I even do? Or maybe you've changed your mind and regret that we filed the application. It's not too late to cancel everything. Louisa's voice rang with indignation. David looked around helplessly, as if seeking support. A little more, and the couple would have started a full-blown argument. The situation was saved by the bus driver, who barked loudly. Hey, you two lovebirds. How long are you going to argue? We're leaving. Take your seats. Louisa swiftly climbed the steps and made her way inside the bus without looking back, making it clear to her fiancé that she was upset. Forgetting about the small quarrel, David called out. ISA, call me as soon as you arrive. I'll be waiting for you. Know that even one day without you is pure torture for me. His confession brought smiles and admiration from many passengers. One woman remarked philosophically, and they say modern youth can't love sincerely. No, my friends, times change, people change, but love remains the same. No one dared to argue with her. Only the grumpy lady who had made it onto the bus thanks to the driver sneered. Love? Nonsense. All this talk is just an excuse for human nature's basest instincts. Clearly ready for an argument, the woman looked around, but no one was willing to engage. The bus slowly pulled away from the station. Louisa saw David still standing on the platform. But what happened next remained beyond her sight. The moment the vehicle left the station, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard approached David. The young man asked hopefully, Uncle George, what do you think? Do you like my fiancé? His relative shrugged uncertainly. I don't even know what to tell you. You can't truly know a person at first glance. But overall, I got a good impression of her. She seems modest, dressed decently, a very charming and lively girl. The young man's face lit up with a joyful smile. Thank you, Uncle George. You know how important your opinion is to me. His uncle impatiently interrupted him. I'm glad to hear that, but you're the one who will have to live with this girl. The only thing that worries me is the haste. Marriage is an important step in life, and you need to approach it with wisdom. I don't think you fully understand what you're getting into. David protested passionately. Uncle George, I expected support from you, not judgment. I love Louisa, and I know this is for life. For her, I am ready for anything, even to move mountains. George laughed. Don't do anything reckless. And let the mountains stay where they are. David didn't like it when his uncle laughed at him. Nor did he like not being taken seriously. His face darkened instantly. You and Uncle Nestor are always joking. I entrusted you with something deeply personal, and you just... His relative patted him on the shoulder. Nestor and I never lose our sense of humor, even in difficult times, and I advise you to do the same. You can count on our help. If the need arises, we'll be there. Your mother asked me to keep an eye on you, and I gave her my word. You did the right thing by seeking advice. But remember, in this situation, your own view is the most important, not anyone else's. If you love this girl and can't live without her, don't pay attention to what others think. David exhaled with all his passion. I can't, Uncle, I can't even breathe without her. Then marry her. George fell silent. He pondered for a moment before quietly saying, I think we shouldn't rush to inform your father just yet. Let the wedding be a surprise for him. That way, we'll have time to prepare properly." The young man nodded in agreement. "Uncle George, whatever you say. To be honest, I'm more worried about Louisa's parents. I'm not sure they'll be happy to learn that their daughter is planning to get married without their consent." George froze in place. His surprise was so great that he was momentarily speechless. When he finally regained his voice, he asked, "She really decided this without their approval, just like that?" David proudly lifted his chin. "Uncle, Louisa and I are adults. We have every right to make our own decisions." His uncle said nothing, but thought to himself, still just a boy. This wasn't right, it wasn't according to tradition. A wedding for a young girl was always a grand affair, a bright and festive occasion. And it always began with asking for her parents' blessing. George loved his nephew, but he already sensed the trouble that was bound to follow this mess. His silence had a greater effect on David than any harsh words. The young man understood that his mother's brothers silently disapproved of him, yet at the same time, he knew that George would have to keep the promise he had made to his mother. That was the law of their people. The farther the bus traveled from the regional center, the stronger Louisa's anxiety grew. Her imagination painted the most dramatic scenarios of her upcoming conversation with her parents. After all, neither her mother nor, especially, her father had any idea that their daughter had been seeing a young man for nearly a year. Louisa had a feeling that the news of her upcoming wedding would shock them. But she was certain she was making the right choice because she loved David with all her heart. She had always shared her worries with her mother and had always found understanding in return. But this time, she had kept her biggest secret from her. There were several reasons for this, but the main one was that Senora Maidana believed her daughter was too young to make independent decisions. The second reason was Louisa's extreme shyness. Even as a teenager, she avoided boys. Although her classmates offered her friendship, and in high school, some even tried to court her, Louisa never responded to any gestures of affection. When alone with a young man, she would freeze in place. Her friends laughed at her. "Maidana, are you sure you're normal? If you keep running away from boys like this, you'll never get married," they would tease her. Some girls even called her a nun behind her back. Louisa knew about this hurtful nickname, but there was nothing she could do about it. The moment a boy approached her, she would turn to stone. But her mother considered her shyness perfectly normal. With optimism, she would say, "Don't worry, my dear, everything has its time. One day, my Isa will fall in love with a good man, and we'll have such a wedding that the whole town will be talking about it." After school, Louisa enrolled in a theater college. She dreamed of becoming a makeup artist, and her parents did not stand in her way. During a family meeting, her father gave his final word. "Your mother and I don't really like your choice, but if it makes you happy, then go ahead and study." And so, Louisa worked hard to achieve her dream. She saw makeup artists as magicians, people who could transform anyone's appearance in a short time. She, too, wanted to become a professional and work in a theater or a film studio. Focused on this high goal, she dedicated herself entirely to her studies, never getting distracted by entertainment. This was why her parents never worried about her. Whenever neighbors asked about their daughter, her father proudly replied, "Our Isa is doing great." Of course, some acquaintances hinted that once country girls moved to the city, they often lost their way. Senor Maidana always had a dignified response to such insinuations. "It all depends on upbringing. Our Louisa knows right from wrong. My wife and I didn't raise her in a barn." Only occasionally, when Louisa returned home for visits, her mother would jokingly ask, "Daughter, haven't you found yourself a suitor in the city yet? What if you run off and marry someone without us even knowing?" Louisa would blush and pale, while her father would answer for her, "Woman, stop teasing the girl. She has more important things to focus on. Let her finish school, get her diploma, and find a good job. Then we'll talk about suitors. Right now, it's too soon." But Senora Maidana, like any mother, worried in her own way about her daughter. She couldn't stay silent. Standing up, she wiped her hands on her apron and looked at her husband as if he were a criminal. Eduardo, a girl's youth is short. If you keep putting off marriage, she might end up an old maid. And anyway, I was just joking. Senor Maidana would usually retort sarcastically. Your jokes are terrible. You blurt things out at the worst possible time, so bad that all I can do is stand there, wondering whether to laugh or cry. The mother never lacked a sharp tongue, and soon, a heated argument would break out between the parents. As usual, they would become so engrossed in their verbal duel that they would forget not only the cause of their disagreement, but also their daughter. The thought of her parents warmed Louisa's heart. She naively thought, Mama and Papa only want the best for me. I'll tell them how wonderful David is. They will surely like him, and they won't object to our wedding. With this thought, she jumped off the bus at the stop near the department store. The village of Costa Pedregosa was a cozy place to live. It had a school and a kindergarten, a community center, and a post office. The department store and a few small shops were also part of the infrastructure, along with a modest cafe that was always packed in the evenings. Senora Maidana managed this cafe and was quite satisfied with her job. Senor Maidana, Luisa's father, also held a managerial position. He was the head of the repair workshops at the agricultural complex Fowl. 2 leaders in one family, trouble was inevitable. Thus, it had become a household norm to break the silence of family life with loud arguments. 2 strong-willed people could never live quietly together. The Maidana family had a tradition of sharing their daily events over dinner. This custom continued even after Louisa enrolled in college. Every 2 weeks, she would return to her home village, eagerly telling her parents about her life in the city. Although she had been seeing David for nearly a year, she had managed to keep it a secret. To be fair, her parents never showed much interest in her personal life, assuming she was entirely focused on her studies. This was why she was so anxious about how to break the news of her upcoming wedding. With these thoughts swirling in her head, she finally arrived at her childhood home. Her mother greeted her with joy. Our darling daughter is here. Eduardo, where are you? Come and greet her. Senora Maidana rushed to the gate. Hearing her call, Senor Maidana ran out of the garage. Why are you yelling like someone in distress? But when he saw Louisa, he quickly approached her, scolding her on the way. ISA, why didn't you let us know you were coming? I would have picked you up. The girl kissed her mother first, then her father. Dad, why trouble you? It's only a 5-minute walk from the department store to our house. I enjoyed the walk. Her father took her bag, while her mother linked arms with her and led her into the house. Tell us, how are things going? How are your studies? Louisa eagerly answered their questions, but her mind was preoccupied with the real reason for her visit. However, her parents, constantly interrupting each other, launched into the latest village news. Senor Maidana started rambling about issues with spare parts deliveries. If things keep going this way, our farm will go bankrupt and be sold off for pennies, and we'll be left without jobs. Senora Maidana remarked sarcastically. Eduardo, what are you complaining about? If Fowl shuts down, you can always find side jobs. You have golden hands, you can bring any piece of junk back to life. And besides, I don't see why you brought this up now. Louisa isn't interested in hearing about your spare parts. And you think she's interested in your gossip? Her husband countered, equally sarcastic. I don't spread gossip, I share reliable information. Senor Maidana laughed. Sure, daughter, now your mother is going to fill your head with nonsense. Senora Maidana made a displeased face, but before she could reply, the head of the Maidana household continued. In my opinion, of all the recent events in Costa Pedregosa, the most noteworthy is when Aunt Chucha caught Uncle Federico stealing. That story is no gossip, it happened in front of the whole village. The elderly Soto couple had always been a source of gossip. Aunt Chucha, disregarding the law, was known for her moonshining business, and in her free time, she collected and spread rumors. Uncle Federico had his own hobbies, but his favorite pastime was figuring out where things were left unattended. And to be fair, he had a knack for finding useful things. Some he sold as scrap, while others he kept, saying, "You never know when it might come in handy." The entire village poked fun at the old man's habit, but always in a good-natured way. When her father mentioned the Sotos, Louisa couldn't help but smile. "I wonder what Grandpa got caught stealing this time." Senora Maidana took over the story. "Oh, this was a real comedy. Federico Soto wanted to earn some pocket money. Collecting scrap metal was too hard, and old age was catching up with him. Stealing from others was risky. Since Chucha took every penny of his pension, the old man didn't think twice. He decided to make money off his wife. He started secretly stealing her moonshine and selling it to the men in the village. For almost 2 months, the old lady didn't notice a thing, and business was booming. But greed was his downfall. He wanted to make even more easy money." She paused for a breath, and Senor Maidana eagerly added details. "Yeah, the old man blew it. Chucha caught him red-handed, literally in the act of siphoning the moonshine. She freaked out, ran after him, and in the scuffle, they did something to the distillery, sending clouds of steam everywhere. People thought there was a fire and rushed to help, grabbing buckets and shovels. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the whole village had gathered. When everything cleared up, Chucha was fined for illegal distilling, and the old man got a good scolding from everyone. But she managed to bribe the officer with a couple of liters of her best brew. This story made everyone laugh, momentarily distracting Louisa from her nervous thoughts. Just when she decided it was time to speak up, Senora Maidana checked the time and exclaimed, "Oh, I got carried away chatting. I need to hurry to work. We have a banquet tonight." Senor Maidana perked up. "Oh? Who's splurging this time?" "Graciela Ponce. The police chief's wife?" He raised an eyebrow in surprise. "And what are such respectable people celebrating?" Senora Maidana was already at the door. "Graciela turned 60 yesterday. A significant milestone. By the way, Louisa, as far as I know, Ponce is planning to retire, and the position of director at the cultural center will soon be available. She was always like this." Yes, she and her father had allowed Louisa to leave the village and go steady, but still, day and night, they looked for ways to keep her close. Louisa, frowning at her mother, suddenly couldn't hold back. "Mama, I'm not planning to return to Costa Pedregosa, and honestly, stop meddling in my life." Senora Maidana froze in place, while Senor Maidana's mouth fell open in shock. Louisa realized there wouldn't be a better moment than this. She could no longer keep bottled up what had been accumulating for years. "Mama, Papa, I love you very much, but please, stop deciding my life for me. I'm not 10 or 15 anymore, and I have every right to make my own choices." Senora Maidana whispered softly. "Daughter, what does this mean?" Louisa blurted out. "You keep trying to tie me down, but I'm getting married. And don't try to talk me out of it, it's useless." Louisa expected shouting, threats, and reproaches, but her parents remained in stunned silence. Horror was frozen in her mother's eyes. The girl was seriously frightened and began shaking her mother. "Mama, Mama, snap out of it, what's wrong?" Stammering, the woman quietly said, "How could you, daughter? This isn't right. It's too soon for you to think about marriage." From across the room, Senor Maidana growled, "Who is he?" Louisa wasn't intimidated by her father's stern tone and calmly replied, "David Kritsinia. He's also studying in college and will soon graduate. We've been together for over a year, and a month ago, we filed our marriage application." A happy smile lit up her face. "Mama, Papa, David is a wonderful person. I'm sure you'll like him." She wanted to tell them so much, but her father cut her off. "I don't want to hear anything about this boy, and don't you dare mention his name in my house." Senor Maidana stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Senora Maidana sank onto a chair and burst into tears. Now, even Louisa was overcome with a sense of dread. Was it really that bad? Her parents' initial reaction seemed irrational to her. She thought she was simply getting married, simply loving someone. But apparently, for her parents, things weren't so simple. On Saturday, the village clinic was usually quiet, so Senora Vargas walked to work at a leisurely pace. She had already planned out her day in the morning. She was eager to prepare a winter vegetable salad using a recipe recently shared with her by Ivan Maidana. Imagine her surprise when, from a distance, she saw a familiar figure waiting near the clinic entrance. Senora Maidana was pacing nervously, frequently glancing at her watch. Upon spotting Emilia, she exclaimed with reproach, "Doctor, waiting for you takes an eternity." Vargas smirked. "It's still 5 minutes to 8. Your complaints, Senora Maidana, are completely unfounded. What brings you here so early? Is Eduardo unwell?" The woman's face twitched as if from a nervous tic. She hiccuped a few times and then, clutching her heart, started crying. "Emilia, I think I'm having a heart attack. Everything inside me is tightening, and I can barely breathe." Vargas frowned. "If you were having a heart attack, you wouldn't be pacing around like this. More likely, your nerves are acting up. Let's go inside, and you can tell me everything calmly." Maidana nodded in agreement. "Yes, I'll tell you everything. Maybe you can advise us on what to do." The unexpected patient obediently followed the doctor inside, muttering something incoherent under her breath. In her 25 years of medical practice, Senora Vargas had encountered many peculiar cases, and she had long since learned how to separate real concerns from mere hysteria. Leading Ivan into her office, she gestured toward the examination couch. "First, let me check your blood pressure, and in the meantime, please stay quiet, all right?" The patient nodded but immediately broke the agreement. "Emilia, I need to consult with you urgently. My Eduardo is furious. I'm afraid he might do something reckless." Vargas gently interrupted her. "Ivan, we agreed. Stay quiet for a moment, and then you can tell me everything." Maidana pressed her lips together. While Senora Vargas measured her blood pressure and checked her pulse, the patient sat still, barely moving. After removing the blood pressure cuff, Vargas let out a relieved sigh. "Your blood pressure is a little high, but nothing critical." She walked over to a glass cabinet and retrieved a pack of pills. "Put one under your tongue, and in half an hour, your pressure will be back to normal." Maidana didn't argue and followed the instructions. She sat on the couch, eyes closed, occasionally sniffling. Vargas didn't rush her, even though she had planned to visit homebound patients today. Unfortunately, the population of Costa Pedregosa was aging rapidly, and the list of special care patients grew longer each year. But Senora Vargas never complained about her fate. She loved her work and did her best to alleviate her patients' suffering. Beyond her professional duties, she also helped her fellow villagers with their personal problems. This was why people respected and valued her. Apparently, her thoughts showed on her face, because after a brief pause, Ivan asked, "Emilia, I must have ruined all your plans. Should I come back later?" Vargas shrugged, as if trying to shake off an invisible burden. "I'm in no rush. Go ahead, tell me. What's gotten you so worked up?" The medication had already taken effect, and Maidana began explaining her problem in a more orderly manner. Senora Vargas listened without interrupting. She knew that sometimes, people just needed to talk things out. When Ivan finally reached the events of last night, Vargas couldn't hold back her surprised exclamation. "Isa is getting married? That's quite the news. Congratulations." Maidana looked at her friend with disapproval. "What are you so happy about? What congratulations?" Vargas was equally puzzled. "I don't understand. You're crying over your daughter's wedding?" The distressed mother's voice trembled again. "Of course. She's still a child, just starting her life, and she's already getting married? And to whom? Some David Kritzenia? What if he takes her back to his homeland, and I'll never see my girl again? Vargas shrugged. That's a perfectly normal name. Most likely, he's from the Middle East. There's a region called Abkhazia. Sounds like he's from there. Many years ago, when I was just a child, my family lived there for quite some time, and I have nothing but fond memories of that period. Sonora Maidana sneered. Times are completely different now. Olga responded to her friend's remark with a question. So what, do you suggest ruining all their plans? If you want my opinion, I don't see any problem at all. Louisa is an adult, capable of making her own decisions. If she loves this boy, don't stand in the way of her happiness. Ivan didn't give up. Emilia, what are you saying? What kind of happiness can she have with a boy who is only 20? What can he give her? Vargas smiled and replied. Love. The whole world is built on love. But he is so, Maidana trailed off in the middle of the sentence. She didn't even know what he was like. Sonora Vargas wisely remarked. Ivan, as your best friend, I advise you not to ruin your daughter's life. If she loves this David, let her marry him. And you're wrong to judge someone you haven't even met. If I were you, I'd meet David first and then draw conclusions. Sonora Maidana suddenly jumped up from the couch and headed for the door, sarcastically adding, Thanks for the advice. I didn't expect this from you. But I guess it makes sense, you don't care about someone else's troubles. You just like to play the kind doctor, but in reality, you have a heart of stone. She yanked off her hat and tugged at it nervously. I came to you because my own daughter, my Louisa, has been making these life-changing plans behind our backs. And you tell me not to interfere, not to get involved, not to do anything. My child is on the wrong path, no diploma, no job. You don't have children of your own, so of course, you don't feel this pain. The office door slammed shut, and Sonora Vargas bitterly muttered. So much for that conversation. Her mood was ruined, but she knew she couldn't let it affect her work. After checking the contents of the emergency medical kit, Vargas left the clinic, instructing Aunt Helia, the cleaner, to keep an eye on things. That Saturday, Sonora Vargas had no idea that she would soon be caught in the whirlwind of events surrounding Louisa Maidana's upcoming wedding. Devastated by their daughter's shocking news, the Maidana couple refused to give up. Sonora Maidana returned home in a foul mood. Louisa noticed it immediately and rushed to her with concern. Mama, why do you look so upset? Did something happen at work? Her mother gave her a heavy stare. You still have the nerve to ask me? You stirred up this whole mess, nearly gave me a heart attack, and now you're asking dumb questions. Louisa didn't even have time to respond before her father stormed into the room. Don't waste your breath, Ivan. Our daughter is a selfish brat who refuses to listen to reason. She doesn't care about your health or mine. She's willing to throw away her parents for some random guy. Louisa stared at her furious father in disbelief. What was happening? Where was all this rage coming from? She made a timid attempt to defend her fiancé. Papa, why are you saying that? You don't even know David. The head of the household sneered. I intend to fix that real soon. Tomorrow, I'm going to the city, and I'll rip that boy's legs off. And you, young lady, are staying home, under lock and key. Sonora Maidana wailed. Eduardo, what are you saying? Louisa has an internship at college. If she doesn't show up, they won't let her take her exams, and she won't get her diploma. Senor Maidana dismissed it with a wave of his hand. To hell with that diploma. There's plenty of work in the village. She can go to the farm and raise calves. This so-called free life she wants, forget it. For half an hour, the man ranted about city life, shaming his daughter and scolding his wife. How she had left home, fooled around behind their backs, and now dared to announce she was getting married. His wife wasn't spared either. This is all you're doing. You let her do whatever she wanted. I grew up differently. My father beat me every week, just in case. And look at me, I turned out just fine, thanks to him. Louisa wept quietly, while Yvonne sighed. She knew her husband would eventually cool down and change his mind. Until then, she had to endure. And soon enough, Senor Maidana did calm down. He softened his demands. Fine. Let her finish her internship, get that damn diploma. But I still need to meet this arrogant kid and have a man-to-man talk. He glanced at Louisa. There will be no wedding. Let your David find another fool. You're going to the registry office and withdrawing your application. Got it? Louisa barely whispered. Papa, but you can't do that. Maidana put an end to the discussion. If you don't do it, I will. And then the whole village will know how my daughter disgraced herself with a foreigner. Senora Maidana subtly gestured to her daughter not to argue. Louisa didn't push the matter, but she locked herself in her room and refused dinner. Her mother, now calmer, felt genuinely sorry for her daughter. Maybe she had done wrong by not thinking about her parents, about her future. But what now? Starve? Sweetheart, eat at least a little. You'll get weak. From behind the door came the sound of sobbing. Senor Maidana growled. Yvonne, stop hovering by the door. Nothing will happen to her if she skips dinner. Let her sit there and think about her actions. For the first time, Senora Maidana saw her husband in this state, and it scared her. She hesitantly asked, Eduardo, could you be a little gentler with Louisa? She's not a child anymore. The second the words left her mouth, she regretted them. His temper flared again. Realizing this fight was escalating too far, she wisely stepped away. She busied herself with household chores, unable to stop thinking. What to do? If Eduardo went to the city, he'd hurt that boy. She hated the scoundrel who seduced her daughter. What mother wouldn't? But she was different. In her worldview, beating people was wrong. It was a sin. That evening, an audacious plan formed in her mind. To neutralize her husband, she mixed a sleeping pill into his orange juice. Early the next morning, she shook Louisa awake. ISA, I packed your bag. Go to the bus station. Catch the first bus. The girl hastily tried to get ready, but everything kept slipping from her hands. Her mother urged her on. Hurry, before your father wakes up. And warn your David not to show himself too much. It's best if he leaves town for a while. She hesitated in the doorway, biting her lip before adding, This doesn't mean I approve of your plan or that you're forgiven. But if your father loses control, we'll all suffer the consequences. Louisa kissed her mother on the cheek on the way out. Mama, thank you. You're a true friend. Senora Maidana pleaded. Daughter, maybe reconsider this wedding? Can't you see how furious your father is? No, Mama. I want to marry him. He is my family now, and this is my own family, not yours. My father's mood has nothing to do with it. Louisa rushed out the door, while Senora Maidana once again sank into her thoughts. Senor Maidana finally woke up at lunchtime. He glanced at the clock and grabbed his head. How could I have overslept? Woman, why didn't you wake me up? His wife appeared at his call, smiling sweetly. Eduardo, why are you yelling? The man rubbed the back of his head. My head is pounding like I had a drink last night. Senora Maidana eagerly added. It's just stress. You got too worked up over ISA, and your blood pressure spiked. Want me to call Senora Vargas to check on you? Maidana waved her off. I don't have time to be sick. I need to get to the city. I'll have to get my old jalopy running. Make me something to eat. He abruptly stood up from bed, but his legs gave out, and he staggered. Senora Maidana rushed to his side. Eduardo, be careful. She exclaimed. I'm telling you, it's all from nerves. I wasn't feeling great myself yesterday, and Olga gave me a good pill. It helped right away. You should rest today, otherwise, you might end up having a heart attack. The man grumbled. Curse that sharp tongue of yours. But he obediently lay back down. Soon, medical help arrived in the form of Dr. Vargas. She listened to his heart for a long time before speaking with concern. You should get an EKG. Your heart rhythm is off, and your blood pressure is quite low. This worried Maidana enough that he decided to postpone his trip to the city for another day. As soon as the two women stepped outside, Senora Vargas turned to her friend. Ivan, tell me honestly, what did you put in your husband's drink? Ivan nervously tugged at the belt of her robe. Emilia, he was going to the city to deal with that, what's his name, David. And when he's in that state, he could do something reckless. So, I thought I'd calm him down a little. I gave him a sleeping pill. The ones they prescribed me at the city hospital a while back. How many did you give him? 3 or 4 pills. They're tiny, those little tablets. And my Eduardo is built like a bull. I figured he needed a bit more. Vargas shook her head disapprovingly. Never do that again. Thank God nothing serious happened. Ivan stammered in confusion. Emilia, but they're such small pills. Can they really do any harm? Vargas smirked. Any medicine can be harmful in horse-sized doses. Maidana was in shock, realizing she had almost poisoned her own husband. Senora Vargas left for home, leaving her bewildered friend on the porch. But Senora Maidana had no idea that her husband had overheard most of their conversation. The bedroom window was slightly open, and he had excellent hearing. He hadn't even needed to get out of bed. With irritation, Senor Maidana muttered, So that's the kind of loving wife I have. Well, just you wait, my dear conspirator. I'll make you worry. You'll be the one gulping down handfuls of sedatives. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and called his friend, the local police officer, with whom he had a good relationship. Speaking quietly so his wife wouldn't hear, he said, Victor, I've got a situation with ISA. I keep calling, but she's not picking up. Can you give me a ride to the city? Ponce, still groggy from his wife's birthday celebration, responded with little enthusiasm. Eduardo, is it really that urgent? I'm still recovering from last night. Maidana pleaded. Ponce, please, I need your help. A person's life is at stake. The officer immediately snapped to attention. Whose life? My daughter's. She left, completely distraught, and now she won't answer my calls. And, well, you know that bus takes the bridge route. Maidana dramatically exaggerated the situation, and Ponce said at once, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Maidana adjusted the plan. Better if I come to you. Caught up in her household chores, Senora Maidana didn't notice when her husband slipped out of the house. She only realized he was missing in the evening when it was time to set the table for dinner. She called out loudly, Eduardo, come eat. Silence. She hurried to the bedroom, but it was empty. That's when she realized her husband had outmaneuvered her. She dialed his number, only to hear the familiar ringtone from under the pillow. The woman exclaimed, That scoundrel! He deliberately left his phone here. What do I do now? I need to warn ISA. But her daughter wasn't answering either. Ivan's mind spun with one terrible thought after another. She imagined her husband being dragged away in handcuffs, then saw a group of young men kicking him while he screamed in pain. Other, even darker scenarios flooded her mind. Her anxiety only subsided when Senor Maidana returned home. He was calm. Meeting his wife's questioning gaze, he smirked and said mockingly, You worried about me, huh? Made yourself sick with nerves? Take 3 pills, or better yet, for sleeping pills, you'll feel much better in no time. She lowered her eyes. Revenge served. Senora Maidana knew better than to press him with questions at that moment. A week passed, then another. Life in the village flowed as steadily as the river of the same name. The drama in the Maidana household gradually lost its edge, fading into the background. Several times, Sonora Vargas, the village doctor, tried to restore relations with her friend. She called to check on Eduardo's health, but Sonora Maidana answered briefly and coldly. "No need to worry. Eduardo is healthy and doesn't even have a cough." It was easy to guess that she still held a grudge. But Olga wasn't about to bow her head and beg for forgiveness. She had no time for such trivialities, especially since there was complete chaos at the clinic. The young paramedic suddenly needed a week off. The young man pleaded with Vargas. "Sonora Vargas, I really need this. It's a family emergency. My sister was widowed, and she desperately needs help." And she took pity on him. After all, she was human. The mere thought of losing her own husband made life seem colorless. Let the boy go help his sister. But her kindness turned into double the workload. Now she had to handle clinic appointments and house calls for patients not only in Costa Pedregosa but also in the nearby villages. After a week of this exhausting routine, Sonora Vargas was completely drained. Her husband, Lucho, was not happy either. "Emilia, you're gone all day, and I don't like it. I feel like a widower. I don't see my wife. I have to feed all the livestock by myself, and on top of that, I work too. And let's not even talk about your cooking. I'm sick of plain rice." She didn't want to argue with her husband. She was too exhausted from work. So she kept explaining patiently. "Lucho, just bear with it for a few more days. My Ferrera will be back from leave soon, and I'll start making you paella and meatballs again." Lucho grumbled but agreed to wait a little longer. "Maybe we can at least go to the city this weekend? Spend a day together? I'm not a monster, I just miss my wife." The nearest town was no metropolis. A small resort town nestled in picturesque nature, not too far from all the essential infrastructure, a beautiful lake that supplied mineral water to the local sanatoriums. Evening was approaching, and the sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson. The breathtaking scenery reflected in the still water. Despite her exhaustion and the long road home ahead, Vargas couldn't help but admire the view. But her husband, patiently carrying their heavy grocery bags, gave her a nudge. "If you stand there gaping, you won't make it home before midnight. Imagine how delightful it'll be to go to work half asleep. And that road at night? No streetlights on the highway." Sonora Vargas snapped out of her trance and suddenly heard voices. A group of men was gathered by the lakeshore. A luxury car was parked in the distance, barely visible through the bushes. Vargas tried to get a better look at their faces, but quickly realized she didn't recognize them. She wasn't in town often, but she knew the regulars, locals who strolled through the park near the lake. These men were strangers. Probably visiting someone, she thought. One of them noticed her and waved amicably. "Beautiful place you've got here," he said. She replied with a polite smile. "I'm glad you like it. Are you here for a vacation?" The second man, an older gentleman with an intelligent-looking beard, added, "Oh, our nephew brought us here. Wants to introduce us to his fiancée. And just look at this scenery." Olga smiled and glanced briefly at her husband over her shoulder. A wedding was always a reason for joy. She couldn't help but think of her friend, Ivan, but quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Ivan would come around. "Wishing your nephew happiness," she said warmly. She and her husband turned to leave. The men, seemingly uninterested in them, continued their conversation. But what they said next froze Vargas mid-step. They weren't speaking in the local language. Instead, they conversed in a rare Abkhaz dialect. Time rewound in her mind like an old film reel. Memories of her childhood in Sukhumi came flooding back. For 5 years, her family had lived in that paradise, and during that time, Emilia had learned to understand and speak Abkhaz. The local children had helped her pick up the language. Later, her father had been transferred for work. She had kept in touch with her childhood friends for a while, but then life's troubles took over. Her father had retired due to health reasons, and since he had never owned a house of his own, the family had to return to Costa Pedregosa, where their grandfather's old but spacious home was waiting for them. It was here, on their ancestral land, that her father passed away 8 years ago. All these memories flashed through her mind in mere seconds. The men spoke loudly, and at first, Vargas had wanted to leave to avoid intruding on their conversation. But after taking a few steps, she stopped abruptly, stunned by what she had just heard. "George, if it can't be done peacefully, we'll have to abduct the girl. Things aren't looking good for us. At least let our boy do something by tradition." Vargas turned sharply. The stocky man with a mustache waved at her again and spoke to his companion. "What do you think, George?" The bearded man immediately responded. "Looks like we have no other options. We'll have to kidnap her. David called. He said he put Louisa on the last bus, so she'll be back in the village soon. Yeah, he rushed things. Now we have to drive all the way out there. On the other hand, snatching a girl in the city isn't good. Too many witnesses. George, I just want David to be happy. He's a good boy." A light bulb went off in Vargas's head. David? With an Abkhaz surname? And now these men, Abkhazians, standing right here? They were planning to abduct Louisa Maidana. That's why they had come to this little town. Panic gripped her. Vargas bolted toward the road, ignoring her bewildered husband struggling to keep up. The strangers' voices still carried in the air, but her mind was too clouded with fear to process their words. She didn't know where to run first, to the Maidanas, to the police, or to the bus station. Jumping into the car, she hurriedly told her husband about the conversation she had overheard. "Run to the police station, call Maidana on the way. I'll start calling too." Meanwhile, Senor Ponce, the local officer, had decided to enjoy a rare moment of relaxation. Fresh out of the shower, he made his way to the veranda, where his wife was waiting for him. "Oh, Graciela Ponce, I'm exhausted," he groaned. His wife gave him a knowing look. "No wonder. You run around all day like a madman. You're not a young man anymore, Victor. Maybe it's time to think about retirement?" Ponce sighed. "You're right. Graciela, I swear, as soon as they send my replacement, I'm filing my resignation. I'll retire and start raising rabbits." Graciela Ponce scoffed. "You've sworn that 100 times already. You can't live without your job. I'd understand if Costa Pedregosa had high crime rates. But all you deal with are petty thefts and bootleggers." Ponce protested. "Graciela, have you forgotten the crime I prevented?" His wife smirked. "If you mean that escaped convict you caught, that was 20 years ago." Ponce grumbled. "Well, Costa Pedregosa is a peaceful place, and I'd like to think I played a part in keeping it that way. Criminals know there's nothing for them here." Before he could say another word, Vargas burst into the yard, out of breath. "Senor Ponce, we have an emergency." The officer tugged at the collar of his robe and stood up. "Senora Vargas, explain yourself. What happened?" The woman could barely catch her breath. There were foreigners in town. They planned to come here and abduct Louisa Maidana. Years of service had prepared Ponce for anything. Within a minute, he had thrown on his uniform and secured his holster. His wife clung to him. "Victor, where do you think you're running off to? You don't even know if it's true. Why get involved?" She struggled to keep up with her aging husband. "You're still playing hero? Think about it, where would kidnappers even come from? Emilia has always been overly dramatic. You need to interrogate her properly. She sees a tiger but describes a kitten." The officer, like a character from an old action movie, declared. "While some doubt, others act." Graciela wailed after him. "Victor, what kind of man are you? We were supposed to retire and raise rabbits." Olga watched the scene unfold without interfering. There was only one thing she didn't understand. What did rabbits have to do with this? How were those fluffy creatures connected to Louisa's abduction? Ponce was already sprinting toward the department store, where the bus from the regional center always stopped. Trying not to fall behind, Olga called out, "What time does the bus arrive at the final stop?" "I'm not sure," she replied between breaths. "Around 9, I think." They were just reaching their destination when the bus, headlights gleaming, turned around and soon disappeared down the road. Ponce wiped sweat from his forehead. "Looks like we were too late, Vargas. The bus already left." Vargas speculated. "If Louisa had arrived on that bus, we would have seen her by now. The bus turns around far away, so she should have been walking toward us by now." Ponce suddenly perked up. "Exactly. So we really were too late. What now, Vargas?" Her mind was in chaos, unable to offer a concrete solution. But Victor's brain worked in emergency mode, and suddenly, an idea struck him. "Vargas, you said they had a white car?" She confirmed. "Yes, shiny and expensive. I only remembered one number, 9 at the end. It's my lucky number." Ponce beamed. "Good job, Vargas. That's valuable information. We're launching an intercept operation. I'll call the district office, and you go to the Maidanas. Tell them that if the kidnappers call, they should agree to all their demands. The priority is keeping Louisa safe." Within minutes, they had split up across the village. Ponce was reporting the abduction of a theater college student. The entire district police force was put on alert. Officers were searching for a white foreign car with a license plate ending in a 9. From the department store to the Maidana house was about 800 meters, quite a distance for a 45-year-old woman. Considering her earlier sprint, Sonora Vargas barely managed to reach the house. From a distance, she saw that all the lights were on, and a crowd had gathered by the gate. Among them stood Aunt Chucha, wailing dramatically. What a tragedy for the parents. Monsters. They stole their only daughter and will demand $1 million. Her cries were interrupted by old man Federico. "How do you know they'll ask for $1 million? Is $1 million even money nowadays? They might demand 2, or even 10. Sonora Vargas was baffled by the gathering and Chucha's loud laments. She had barely had time to process how everyone seemed to know already when the main mourner spotted her. "Vargas, hurry. Ivan is unwell, she might be having a heart attack." Someone shoved the doctor toward the gate, and Vargas trudged toward the house, hoping to get some clarity inside. But her hopes were in vain. Sonora Maidana lay on the bed, clutching her chest. Senor Maidana hovered anxiously around her. "Ivan, I swear, we just talked to that boy. In fact, I even liked him. I didn't threaten him, I only asked him to delay the wedding." Ivan rasped. "I don't believe you. If everything was as you say, our daughter wouldn't have been kidnapped." Her husband insisted it was just a coincidence and that Louisa had been taken by completely different people for ransom. Sonora Vargas could stay silent no longer. "And what makes you think Louisa was kidnapped for money? And why is Aunt Chucha crying about a ransom to the whole street?" Senor Maidana spread his hands in confusion. "That's what Ponce said. He called us about half an hour ago and told us not to wait for ISA because she had been taken by criminals. As for Chucha, she happened to be here, checking with my wife about the cost of a memorial dinner at the cafe." Olga chuckled nervously. Is she planning her own funeral, or is she worried about Federico? Ivan managed a weak smile. That pair will live long enough. She was just curious. She saves money for a rainy day, but prices keep rising, so she's unsure if her savings will be enough. Suddenly, the phone rang. Ivan grabbed it. It must be the kidnappers. Senor Maidana snatched the phone from her hands. I'll talk to these scumbags myself. You're barely holding on. He pressed the phone to his ear and shouted in terror. ISA, are you okay? Where are you? Are they hurting you? As he listened to his daughter's response, his face went through a range of emotions, first shock, then bewilderment, and finally, he turned pale again. He handed the phone to his wife. "Here, talk to her. She's spending the night at David's." Yvonne grabbed the phone. For a few seconds, she covered the receiver with her hand and shot a wide-eyed look at Olga. Her mouth moved soundlessly, like a fish out of water, unsure what to say. "Well? What's with Louisa?" "Kidnapped. They kidnapped my Louisa," the assembled neighbors gasped in horror, but before they could react, Yvonne continued, "She's at David's because the wedding is soon. In his culture, it's customary to steal the bride." Just as Louisa's parents sighed in relief upon learning she was safe, David's uncles were already being detained, their wrists bound in handcuffs. The bewildered men demanded explanations. One officer curtly stated, "You are under arrest on suspicion of abducting a young woman. Further details will be discussed at the station." For several hours, George and Nestor were held at the police station, separated to prevent them from coordinating their statements. The investigator asked just one question: why had they kidnapped the girl? "We are not criminals. We did take the girl, but she was aware of everything. It's a tradition." David and Louisa had to come to the station to prove that nothing wrong had happened. That's when all the details came to light. Among the Abkhazians, as well as many other Eastern and Caucasian cultures, there was a tradition of bride kidnapping, not in the violent sense, but as a symbolic act to ensure the parents would bless the marriage. In the modern world, this was done only to honor the old customs. The girls always knew in advance who was abducting them, and the couple's love was well known to everyone. Unfortunately, Louisa's parents had never learned about David's background. When Victor Ponce was briefed on the situation, he gave up. The old policeman had hoped to retire with dignity, perhaps by preventing a major crime or catching a real criminal. Instead, it was just a wedding. Completely dejected, the officer simply submitted his resignation. Graciela Ponce tried her best to comfort him. "Victor, don't take it so personally. There comes a time in every person's life when they have to make a big change." Her husband looked at her miserably. "Graciela, go buy some straw from the neighbors. To line the rabbit cages, and to plug my ears. The whole village is laughing at me." He hung his head even lower. "We turned the whole town upside down, and the crime wasn't even worth a dime." Graciela Ponce gently embraced him. "Victor, people will talk and forget. At least now you can retire with a clear conscience. We'll raise rabbits together. If you think about it, this is all our doctor's fault. She overheard something, rushed to you in a frenzy, and you grabbed your gun without thinking." Once everything was sorted out, David's relatives were released. Though they had endured several unpleasant hours, they took the situation with good humor. Nestor even joked, "Our police force is very efficient. You don't even have time to blink before you're cuffed and tossed into jail." George was less amused. "This was your idea. You wanted to kidnap a bride." Nestor shrugged guiltily. "How was I supposed to know it would turn into this? I just wanted to honor our ancestors' traditions." Trouble also awaited Senora Vargas. More than anything, she felt guilty for being the main cause of the whole commotion. She was especially ashamed in front of the police chief, knowing that because of her, the man had completely lost his passion for the job he once loved. However, not everyone in this story ended up on the losing side. After several hours of fear, uncertainty, and anxiety for their daughter's life, the Maidana couple had a change of heart. Not only did they stop opposing the wedding, but they also started actively preparing for the upcoming celebration. A few days before the wedding, David finally met his future in-laws. He left an especially strong impression on Senora Maidana. That very evening, she proudly shared with the neighbors, "Such a polite and talented young man. He wants to apply to the Academy of Fine Arts later." The woman absent-mindedly twisted a kitchen towel in her hands. "And his people have such interesting, colorful traditions. Not like our village customs. Let them marry. They're both artists, they'll be happy together." And, excuse my pragmatism, but his relatives will take care of the financial side. George gifted the newlyweds a one-bedroom apartment. At first, the couple wanted to hold their wedding in the city, but in the end, they decided to move the celebration to Costa Pedregosa. The event took place in the cafe managed by Senora Maidana. The wedding was bright and lively. Even Aunt Chucha danced and sang some rather inappropriate songs, while old Federico enjoyed himself among the men, drinking and exchanging stories. Some guests tried to steal the bride for a dance, but they failed. David held his beloved's hand all evening, whispering, I can't believe this is happening to us. I'm so happy. She echoed him. I'm happy too. Senora Vargas watched the newlyweds and suddenly realized that if it weren't for her anxious nature, this wedding might never have happened. The Maidanas would have likely quarreled until they forbade the marriage entirely. Sometimes, families need to go through fears and worries to return to a peaceful life filled with love and understanding.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.